We are live. Good morning and welcome to Japan
Good
Distilled
morning.
Shochu'sday. Happy Shochu'sday. Christopher Pellegrini in Tokyo with my co-host as ever. Who are you?
Stephen Lyman in Fukuoka. How are you,
Are we
Christopher?
Genki?
I'm Genki. I don't know. How about you?
This is about a medium level of Genk from me. Excited to be basically moving into what for me is a fresh part of the year, meaning the post pollen hell hole of Tokyo, where everything that I look at and everything I smell makes me sneeze. So we're coming down from that, and I'm incredibly happy. I'm looking forward to Golden Week when it's going to be the next level of respiratory clarity.
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with this crap, do you?
Not yet. I had a few little allergy-like reactions over the last month, so I have a feeling that they're going to hit me hard next year. But these acquired, hay fever type allergies are acquired, and I only moved here 3 years ago, and it usually takes me about 4 years to start to have all of those kinds of symptoms. So I'm not really looking forward to next spring.
All
But
you folks
you know,
out there who have spring allergies, hay fever, you feel me on this. I'm sure it just
yeah,
adds a level of difficulty to life that is
sure.
really uncalled for.
Well, and in Japan, the country of micro seasons, we do have typhoon season or rainy season coming up, right? So you got soggy socks to look forward to.
Yep. Oh yeah, sure. Just before the heat sets in.
Yeah.
I recently went to inquire about this therapy that's only for cedar pollen, and it's like some really concentrated dose of the pollen that you drop under your tongue every day. It takes like a couple of years. You have to do that
Hmm.
every day for a couple of years. It only works for cedar, and I'm allergic to more
Interesting.
than one frickin' tree, of course. But
Sure.
and I was like, well, that doesn't sound highly effective, does it? And even the doctor was like, this is probably not the best therapy because
Hmm.
the duration is so long and the science on its efficacy is so short. So I was
Yeah.
like, wow, there's really just you have to keep taking these drugs, these other medicines that make you sleepy, and blah blah blah. Well, the Japanese stuff doesn't. The Japanese pharmaceuticals tend to be quite mild,
Hmm.
which is to say that they're not particularly effective except when
Hmm.
used an extended duration. You kind of have to start taking them several weeks to a month before hay fever season starts to make sure that you've got the defenses built up.
Hmm.
It's a bunch of baloney. But anyway, sorry, I'm
Yeah.
gonna stop
This is not. This is
moaning.
not. This is not allergies day. This is Shochu'sday. So I think we
It's Show
should
Tuesday.
probably get
Show
this show on the
Tuesday, and
road.
I'm drinking coffee. Yeah, we're off to
Yeah.
a confused and muddled start, but nonetheless, we do have something to mention here at the top of the hour. Yay! What do we have to offer people, Stephen?
Yeah. So episode number 10 is now in the podcast feed. This is breaking down the differences between sake and shochu, which sake confuses people. If it's clear, it's generally thought of as being a distilled spirit by a lot of people. But sake, of course, is brewed. It's filtered, and that's why it's relatively clear. It's not water white, but you can see through it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we break down the differences and the similarities between sake and shochu on that episode, and we've got some details in the show notes, as well as something you can't see on the podcast. Is we've got the kanji that's common on domestic bottlings of sake and shochu, so you can start to be able to identify for yourself what's in the bottle that's in front of you at the izakaya next time you're in Japan. You know whether or not it's sake or shochu that you're about to enjoy. So hopefully people find that useful. This was actually one of the early episodes we recorded, but we called an audible. We did the whiskey episodes in between, and now we're getting back to some of that older content. So I think on that episode we actually say join us on Instagram Live every week, and obviously we're no longer on
Right.
Instagram Live. So,
Yeah, we've abandoned that platform, but hey.
but hopefully people can continue to find us here on YouTube or Facebook. But interesting episode. We're going to finish up this series on sort of misconceptions around shochu. So last the episode before this was on honkaku and otherwise is what we called it, which was authentic honkaku shochu, the single distilled stuff, the stuff that, you know, gets you and I jazzed, versus koroi shochu versus konwa shochu and all these other subcategories or categories of shochu in Japan that don't really fit what we think of as the authentic thing. Mm-hmm. And that was the first of these episodes. This one was about differences between sake and shochu. And then the third episode, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks, is shochu versus soju. And so, you know, we may need to hire some personal protection, you know, when that episode comes out.
We were very, 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 very kind and polite and sedate when talking about the differences. I recall, although we did that one a long time ago, so I'm not sure.
We did. Yeah, we should go back and listen to that maybe. I think we did. We were careful.
We were
there are nice things to say about Korean soju. And there's a place for it. I think we talked about that on some of our past Shochu'sdays. So it's So that'll run through that, and then I think what we're going to get back to, and it'd be great to hear from people about what you'd like to hear about on the podcast. I think what we might start to do is deep dives into the different predominant styles of shochu, honkaku shochu, so sweet potato, rice, barley, etc. And then at some point once we've had a chance to sort of wrap our heads around it, we will be getting a gin episode out. But more to come on Japan Distilled podcast.
Yep. And you can find Japan Distilled at japandistilled.com, which is probably the best place to pick it up because of the show notes that are there, the imagery, all of that. It's an extra educational experience, or a plus educational experience. If you prefer to use iTunes, that's cool. You can get it there. You can get it just about everywhere. Podcasts tend to reside on the internet, so please check that out. And if you need to catch up, there are 10 episodes now, as Steven said. Then take your time, plow through them. You got 2 weeks, or less than that, a week and a half until episode 11 drops. And we look forward to hearing back from you about that. So, yeah, cool. Yep. Next, moving on. Next chapter. This is, and just so you know, we are going to get to the meaty part of this segment in a little bit. And that is, of course, talking about the challenges facing the shochu and awamori industry in terms of being judged fairly at these, they're all over the place now, these international spirits competitions dotting the globe. But before we do that, just another kind of fun little sub-segment here. I got a question for Steven. What have you opened recently? What bottle, what new thing have you cracked? And tell us a little bit about it.
It's funny because I don't feel like I am able to stop beating the awamori drum since my return from Okinawa. And what I actually cracked open recently is this Chuko 3-year. We've talked about their ceramics before. This was actually available at my local big box liquor store. And the reason I decided to open it and drink through it is both because I really enjoy Chuko's aged awamori. Now, this is 43%, so it's a little strong. I've been drinking it predominantly mizuwari. About 50-50 with cold water and ice, just to dilute it a little bit. But the reason I decided to plow through this is I really have been wanting to do some secondary aging, not of awamori, but of other stuff. And so I've got this, I have to bend over here. I have this bottle, which I've labeled Hangover. Now, that's just because I had a sticker. Somebody at a bar gave me a sticker that said Hangover. But this unmarked ishobin, it's nearly full, is full of a hodgepodge of samples of soba shochu I've received over the years. And I've blended all of them. I've just poured in all of these little samples. They're different ABVs. They're different production methods. And what I realized is I tried this blend, this little home blend that I've made because I had all these little sample bottles. And I'm like, that's annoying. I don't need all of these little sample bottles. So I just poured them all into an empty ishobin. As I tasted the blend, I realized this stuff feels like it would do really well in clay.
Like, so if that's going to go in that. I got you.
That's right. I'm not going to refill this with Chuko. I've got plenty of other Chuko pots that I can refill with Chuko for my Solera, for my Shitsugi. What I'm planning on doing once I empty this is start to experiment with ceramic pot aging my soba shochu concoction.
Yeah.
which is unfairly labeled hangover.
Yeah, that's a little bit
Not good branding, right? That's
that's
probably
a
not
weird
what
direction.
not what you'd want to call a
Uh-huh.
brand of shochu. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around soba shochu. I feel like of the categories that appear in the market at more than 1% of volume sales, it's the one that I sort of feel like I understand the least. It's
Uh-huh.
virtually all made in Miyazaki or Nagano up in
Nagano makes a bit a
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Nothing
It's just
compared to the volumes made in Miyazaki, of course.
sure. Yeah, so I need to spend some more time thinking and understanding soba shochu. So, and I've never seen it made. It's just sort of a little bit of a blind spot for me.
I went to Unkai's, one of their facilities in Miyazaki. It's gigantic. It's it's got a huge parking lot for cars. The industrial tour, I guess you could say. It really is a very clean and clinical look at how soba joju is made. You get the video, you get
Hmm.
they,
Sure.
they take people through in groups of, I don't know, it might be as large as 40
40.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
have done that tour, but when I say seeing
okay.
it being made, I mean I want to be in the
Yeah,
fermentation
and
room,
that's
smelling
what
the fermentation, talking to the toji,
I hear you.
like
Yeah,
not
I don't
the
know
not
how
the
easy it would be to come by that. You would need we'll need,
not the
if Unkai is interested in having these two Shochu'sday nerds understand buckwheat shochu a little bit better, then you know where to
yeah.
find us.
That's right.
We're happy to come. Put that little white cotton hat on, put the boots on and gloves and hazmat suit, whatever you need, and just let us in on the floor to see and
Yeah.
smell.
Yeah, I don't consider the Unkai It's a Small World boat ride to be sufficient education
Yep,
in soba shochu production. So
definitely not.
anyway, that's what I've opened recently. How about you, Chris?
So
Are
I
you
have a
open to anything?
question about
Oh,
that.
sure.
The two, so it's a 3 year, you said,
Yep.
and so that means maybe you can explain for us
Yep.
where did the 3 years come from?
So it was actually 3 years in the distillery aging before it went into this pot. And then this
Got it.
bottling actually was, oh wow, March 14th of 2019. So it's been two
Okay,
years in
two
this
years.
pot.
So it's a
So
5 year
it's
old then.
it's it's now a 5-year-old. That's right, because it will continue to age in the ceramic as we've talked about before.
Yeah.
And just a word of warning for folks. You see this rubber, it's a silicone cap. Don't clip your fingernails before you try to open this because it was really, really hard for me to get it open the other day because it's a good seal.
Ah,
Um, but you need be able to get a little edge under it. It's quite I've seen these silicone stoppers where they actually overhang the clay. They hang the ceramic. This is like,
yeah.
it's almost like they put too small a stopper in the thing.
Well, it's interesting. That's interesting too, because those two gold pots are all handmade. These are
Hmm.
all unique. Every one is a bespoke pot. So
Hmm.
getting the right size stopper for those little guys is a little bit of an art. You have to try a couple of different widths to get the right seal.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not as simple as it sounds, especially with the bigger and bigger pots, because you might be talking centimeters of difference in terms of the diameter rather than just
Hmm.
millimeters.
Hmm.
And you have to use it. It's a Tetris type of situation with
It is.
getting the right seal on those things.
Yeah, when we visited last time, they had these boxes of random size silicone caps right next to where they were,
Yeah,
you know,
where
making the
they were
pots.
throwing the pots. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And
Just a,
now
very
I
cool.
suspect for this pot is the one that's available most often. This is a 720, and I've seen
Okay,
it a number of different places. So I'm guessing they have some sort of guide as they're making the neck,
I'm sure they do. They know
you
how
know,
to. They do
to
measure
figure
it.
that
Yeah.
out. But
Hmm.
yeah, great little pot. Looking forward to starting my soba shochu experiment. But of course, I'm going to savor the chuko while I'm at it.
Yeah. Very cool.
So how about you? What have
You
you open
you
anything
know
recently?
something that I've actually cracked, and it wasn't this week. Is I had originally cracked the Hakushu non-age statement, and more recently I've cracked this Yamazaki non-age statement, which is lovely. Um, really, I was lucky to get it. I got both of them together in an auction online, and this is, those of you out there who have had Yamazaki before know that it has some really nice sweet notes to it on the nose, and I'm a
Mhm.
fan. Well,
And how you
you
been
like the
enjoying that?
Hakushu better, right?
I do.
Or
Well, I mean, I tend to drink these as a highball, and I
okay,
really love the hint of smokiness you get in a Hakushu highball.
okay.
It also just brings back memories to when I was on a press trip before I moved to Japan, and I ended up in a proper Japanese cocktail bar drinking Hakushu 18 highballs for about 1,000 yen a pop,
Hmm.
which people
Hakushu
here,
18 eyeballs.
yeah,
Jeez.
which I think Hakushu 18 now is probably what, a four, five, six, seven, $800 bottle of whiskey, on the secondary market. So the idea of pouring that into a highball with, some Wilkinson soda just doesn't seem fair anymore. But it was a beautiful, beautiful drink. And it was cheap at the time. This is before the prices started to go nuts. So that just brings back such nice memories. And really, you're getting the same make in the Hakushu non-age statement. It just doesn't have as much age on it, right? So,
Right. Yeah, very
so I really
quality
enjoy that
based
as a
spirits.
highball. But Yamazaki is a nice drink as well. I unfortunately don't have any Yamazaki right now. I do have a couple of bottles of Hakushu 12 that I'm preciously holding on to. But
Yeah, wait
um,
until those hit the market again, I guess.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how have you been enjoying that Yamazaki?
I've been sipping it straight.
Okay.
Kind of like what I was doing with the rum, and I killed all the rum over. I just one of my little things is I'm gonna have a little dollop, maybe 20 milliliters, 30, like basically a shot in a
Mhm.
proper tasting glass of some Western spirit. And more recently, I've lurched into the Yamazaki after going halfway through the Hakushu and didn't want to kill the Hakushu bottle before trying the Yamazaki as well. And I just sit there and nose it for a good 20 or 30 minutes, slowly sip that down, and then move on to usually shochu after that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Cool.
anyways, yeah,
And
cool. Recent bottles. I think this is a good little segment to keep in here. And I think now we can move on to, and something that uh, we both have recent experience with. The next part of today's show is the main part, the meaty part, and that is judging shochu and aomori in spirits competitions. Now, this is a relatively recent thing, at least at any discernible level. Any
mhm.
competition having more than a dozen brands of shochu to judge in a
Mhm.
blind tasting, that's really, really recent. I mean, we're talking within the last few years has
Sure.
this become kind of a thing, and a thing to the extent where we're starting to see competitions take it a little bit more seriously. They're not just throwing shochu in, no, many of them still do, judging shochu against Korean soju, or judging all of these spirits together as Asian spirits, which is just
Mhm.
dumb. You're starting to get places that are breaking premium shochu out or authentic shochu out into its own category, but even then that invites new questions and
Mhm.
difficulties. The reason why this is top of mind for us, or front of mind, is Stephen and I just finished judging the Tokyo Whiskey and Spirits competition. And I think that's something that would be very interesting for people to hear a little bit more about. So Stephen, why don't you give everyone a quick recap on that?
Sure. I mean, it's my first time judging a spirits competition. I've obviously been trained to do this, but I've never been invited to be an official judge before. And so and of course, this was all done remotely, right? We received sample packets in the mail. Normally, everyone goes to a venue, big hotel ballroom for a few days and tastes through a bunch of stuff. But this was actually all done remotely. So I got a box in the mail with the proper tasting glasses and these blinded flights, right? And it was tank aged kokuto or barrel aged rice, or and they were, to their credit, they did break it out by category and even
Mm-hmm.
by subcategory by how it was aged. And then it it was a really interesting experience to sit, and your flights are no more than 8 drinks at a time, and and then you're supposed to judge it based on aroma, flavor, and essentially balance or overall impression. And then
Mm-hmm.
that gives you a summary score. And, a bunch of different judges are assigned the same flight. And then the scores are, I guess, averaged. And then that gives you your score. And then the top scores start to get medals or awards or that sort of thing, right? That's how these competitions generally work. The good ones are blind because we have preconceived notions of what's good and what's not based on our own biases and that sort of thing. And that's something that I really learned because I didn't expect them to be unblinded. But actually, after I submitted my scores, they sent me the unblinded list, so I knew how I graded everything. And I went back and I looked it over, and I thought it was really interesting how it lined up or misaligned with my expectations.
Yeah.
And so it was really educational for me. What made me want to talk about this topic on the show, though, is that so many of the other competitions outside of Japan are not really doing a great job with this. And I think part of the problem is I don't think that a lot of Western spirits judges understand shochu and awamori to the degree necessary to know what's actually desirable in the drink and what's a fault and what you're looking for. And I think the evidence is in what's winning or what's getting top prizes, but also in what's losing, right?
Sure.
What's not scoring well, right? Some of the most interesting, well-regarded shochu in Japan might earn a bronze, which is the lowest medal you can earn at some of these competitions. Some of these competitions, the bronze is the participation trophy. You paid the entry fee, you get a bronze medal, right?
Yeah, which is annoying to me. There's way too many awards handed out at many of these competitions. Yeah,
but I think, and then you'll see wide disparity in this. For example, Dayame. And I knew we weren't going to talk about specific brands, but I'll talk about Dayame because they won double gold, I believe, either San Francisco or International. And then they got either bronze or silver at the other. It's a really wide gap. They both got medals, but they got really disparate medals. And because double gold, basically, they were considered best in class. And then they got, a silver ranking, which is sort of like almost a C grade. If we're thinking about, what these medals really mean based on how many of them are given out at some of these competitions. And Dayame is a really interesting drink because it's that modern fruity style that with the new yeasts that, a lot of the makers are making. But is that really sweet potato shochu? Is that what should be getting top prize, or is it a novelty? Right? At this point, it's like in Japan, it might not really be highly regarded because it doesn't have the characteristic of sweet potato shochu.
Yeah,
as far as in a competition, right?
Sweet potato shochu is always going to be the most difficult one to parse out and find all the sub categories if you want to go that far. But one thing that was for a long time, and still happening in other competitions to this day, you have this big issue of judging a rice shochu directly against a sweet potato shochu, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's one of the first steps, one of the first things that needs to be cleared up. And I helped one unnamed, I'm not going to name drop them, but one competition to really segment their entry form and make sure that you were getting all of the different ingredients separated. You were making sure that Japanese shochu was being judged against other Japanese shochu and not against other spirits from this part of the world, whether it be baijiu from China or soju from Korea. And that was a major first step. And fortunately, and as you would expect, the Tokyo Whiskey and Spirits competition does that as well, and does it to an even greater degree, whereby they segment out the aging vessels. So I had a flight that was only tank aged, sweet potato shochu only tank aged, varying ABVs from 25 all the way up to close to what was it? What was that range? Like 35 to 40? Is that what the
35
range
to
was? 30 to 40?
Yeah.
So they're probably all up above 35%. And then I had another flight that was sweet potato shochu that was tank, I think, or I couldn't really understand it, or pot aged. I think it was probably a combination of the two. It had spent time in clay and then finished in
Mhm.
tank probably. So that was good, and that's leading the pack. I think, as far as
Mhm.
I can tell, I haven't seen it broken out like that in the past, and I think that that's very useful.
Mhm.
And did you have any flights that were separated like that?
I actually ended up judging a lot of Kokuto Shochu, and
Okay.
I had a tank flight, I had a kame flight, I had a barrel flight.
Did you? Oh, okay,
Yep.
great. See, and that's
Yeah.
I think that's huge.
Yep. I
'Cause-
agree. I agree. But then again, getting back to the disparity or how there's so much education needs to happen for the international competitions.
Oh yeah.
As I went back and I looked at which brands did well in my tasting. Now I'm one guy,
Uh-huh.
right? But from my understanding of these drinks, the absolute highest score that I gave, there was one drink that I gave a 97 as my top score. That's out of 100. That's like that would be a top medal winner if that was the average score for the drink, right? That would be a very, very well
That's a
regarded
double gold,
drink,
no question.
right? That product was submitted to one of these international competitions and did not medal,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me is a striking disparity. The single best drink I had in 5 flights did not medal at an international competition. It was
Yeah,
sublime,
and this
right?
is, as you said, it's an education thing. Obviously, you have to know where the guardrails are on Kokuto Shochu. You have to know what is expected, what are going to be faults, what types of slight off flavors, if kept at a low enough level, can be
Hmm.
considered part of the style. And
Yep.
to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think the shochu industry, or not that I've seen, has come up with a style guide.
Hmm. Sure.
If you're judging a beer competition, every single every single style of beer has expectations and things that would be considered to be a little bit outside the bounds of what is considered normal for that style.
Hmm.
And new styles are created where necessary, where they pop up, or new style guidelines are developed. And I think that's something that the shochu industry can and should learn from. I know they do that. They have that in wine as well. You know exactly what to expect from this type of grape grown in this region,
Hmm. Hmm.
and anything that doesn't fit those expectations does veer dangerously into the realm of fault, and that's going to
Hmm.
hurt the score. That we don't necessarily have in the shochu world yet, not even in Japan, so much less so outside of Japan.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the what they did do helpfully for this Tokyo competition is we received representative samples of each of the styles of shochu. So you had rice, barley, sweet potato, kokuto, and awamori samples that you could use to set your expectation, and those were clear middle of the road brands,
Yep.
right? They were really, really standard, what you'd expect if you went into an izakaya in Japan and ordered a drink of that style. This is what you would expect to find in your glass.
Yeah.
And that was helpful because it set that middle ground. And then you were looking for those deviations. You were looking for things that were much more interesting or didn't express as well as that in how you were judging.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's in addition to the education, which is certainly required for the international competitions, I think less so here in Japan for Tokyo. But the other thing is there still needs to be the further gradation. And an
Yeah.
example of that is the single worst score that I gave uh, turned out to be from a very well-regarded distillery, and it was listed as a Kokuto Shochu, and but it was Hanatare. It was the
Uh-huh.
heads,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And I love Hanatare,
Uh-huh.
but it was so off from that representative sample. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't wrap my head around what was wrong with it,
Yeah.
right? And had there been a Hanatare category, I might have given it a much better score because I would have
Sure.
understood what they were trying to do with the drink. But it
Uh-huh.
didn't express as a Hanatare. Most of the Hanatare that I've had has been rice, barley, or sweet potato. And
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure that I've had a Kokuto Hanatare before. So it really did not pop for me the way that it would have if it was one of the others. The other thing is Hanatare is often served like right out of the freezer. It's almost
Sure.
viscous. It's
Yeah.
intended to be drunk extremely cold. And I'm drinking this at room temperature,
Yeah.
straight.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So that, it just really completely, and had I known, like that was the point. If had I known that it was a Hanatare, I might have judged it very differently.
Yeah. I yeah, that's a good call out. I think it's hard. There's so much range with ABV points and styles that there probably does need to be further segmentation of these things. And just as a comment on the representative little sample that they sent, yeah, that's to get all of the tasters from the same table with the same flight on the same page from the start, to make sure everybody's starting from the same doorway, so to speak, and to set everybody's nasal passages in the same way. So sometimes when I've been at other competitions, we're going to judge a cachaça flight, but they put a a brandy in front of you, or even a vodka in front of you, in order to get everybody starting on the same page. And that's great. The one thing, obviously, we were doing this remotely, and that presents a challenge in and of itself. I'm not going to lie. While it's amazing that this can be done remotely, the conditions of all the judges are different, and that obviously lends a little bit of a wild card to the tasting experience. Best tasting environments, of course, neutral walls with no outside aromas, and and making sure that everybody's tasting at the same time of day and that sort of thing. Often late morning is a great time for your palate, or that's what everybody tells me. And, so that there's that kind of variability. But having said that, if you know the drinks, you know the drinks. And so that obviously is not the case in the shochu world. So shochu has a steep climb right now, because most people out there are not shochu and awamori experts. They don't focus on these drinks. Very few of the drinks professionals in the world do. And that's going to be a heavy lift for many years to come, making sure that people do understand what these drinks are all about. I've had conversations with very, very experienced judges who just don't know a damn thing about shochu or awamori yet. And even if they've been to Japan before and they've toured shochu distilleries before, a year later, they have reverted back to don't know a damn thing about shochu, other than the fact that they appreciate it, they respect it, they want to learn more. And that's about the extent of the education there.
Yep, no argument from me on that. I think there is a lot of education to be done for this category. Did anything stand out for you, like when you went back and looked at your samples? Was there anything you're like, oh wow, I score that higher or lower than I expected?
I haven't
you don't have to name brands
yet.
But
yeah, I haven't looked at those yet. I honestly don't really care all that much. I'm gonna say I was not particularly impressed by what was sent to me, so I wasn't really excited about much in there. There were a couple from the sweet potato flights that were like, oh, okay, these are more modern, the much redder, much fruitier, much fresher expressions, which are really interesting to me, even though that's not the style that we think of as sweet potato. But this brings me back to my point from earlier when I said the sweet potato shochu subcategory has so much potential for diversity, much more so than rice shochu or barley shochu, probably, or I'm not sure if I can compare it directly to kokuto shochu, but sweet potato shochu with its plethora of species, and of course you've got all the choices that the toji has in terms of the fermentation, the type of koji used, how long you allow that process to run, and every other thing in between then and when you put it in the bottle. It's a crazy subcategory with so much potential variability. And I don't think that the aging segmentation is enough to divvy it up. I think you may need to go in terms of, do you need to divvy it up in terms of the species, the varietal of sweet potato? I'm really not sure. Or is it by koji strain? It's a wild category. And I had, you've got tank aged sweet potato shochu, 8 different blind samples, but one of them might have been made with, one of them might be colorful. That's 2 different types of purple sweet potato that are blended together for this very lovely aromatic drink, going head to head with something like, I don't know, Hinatayama or something that's really earthy, something from Tasaki Shuzo that has this really rich spiciness made from Kogane Sengan, and they're just totally different styles. And it's really hard to, you first of all, you have to recognize that and say, okay, I see what they're doing here. is this doing it well? And I'm not even going to think about anything else in this flight. That's the challenge for the judges. And obviously for a competition that is very whiskey heavy, that's going to be really hard for a lot of people, I think, to go in that direction. Whereas in the whiskey world, if you say this is a rye whiskey, this is a grain whiskey, and people automatically have pretty, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a pretty narrow, if you think about it as like, sorry, I'm thinking about track and field because I was a track and field guy. I'm thinking about the, the discus or the javelin. You got to heave that thing, but you've got only this amount of space for it to land in. And that's kind of what I think of in terms of beer styles, whiskey, and obviously wine too. There's this much range that you can expect. Anything outside of that is kind of like, huh? And it might hurt the score. Obviously in track and field, it doesn't count. It's a foul. But in the shochu world, for sweet potato shochu, the lines on that damn javelin zone are like all the way around to nearly 360. So like any direction you throw it in, that's still a sweet potato shochu. And so how are you supposed to fathom that and score it? That's really tough. And for a professional judge anywhere else in the world who is new to these spirits, that would be a full-on nightmare. I would panic if I didn't know what was coming at me. How do I approach this? And the answer for sweet potato shochu is look around you, because you've got all of that range and you got to somehow make sense of it. I would love to be part of this conversation. You and I both would, to try and figure out how to divvy it up more. But it is something that's going to take an incredible amount of thought.
Yeah, I think a clear demarcation for me would be distillation, right? Vacuum versus atmospheric. That to me is a really clear place to divide, especially for rice and barley. But I think that holds true for sweet potato as well, even though there's less vacuum distilled sweet potato. But that's a pretty clear demarcation. But other than aging and koji type, it's really hard. After that, you're starting to get into judgments of the judging, right? Because you're just not going to get enough submissions made from wine yeast or made from beer yeast or made from whatever yeast number 7 from whatever part of the country to warrant that being a flight, right? So those are going to have to probably be together, and you can't necessarily, it is a spectrum. You've got from the super deep, rich, earthy styles all the way to these super light, fruity styles that almost express like bubblegum or whatever. And and all of that is fermentation temperature, fermentation time, yeast type, all this sort of thing going into it. It's really difficult to prejudge to decide what's going to go into flights at that point. But for example, in the first Kokuto flight I sat down to, the very first one I tasted was clearly vacuum distilled. Right. But then the next one wasn't. Or it might have been a blend of vacuum and atmospheric, right?
Probably was, yeah.
And it's a huge jump. You're going from like a 25%, vacuum Kokuto. It had lovely aroma, really nice balanced drink. And the next one is full on molasses and treacle and grass, in the same flight. And it's a wrapping your head around that can be difficult.
Yeah, you really have to try and get inside the Toji's head and figure out what they were trying to do and what was the goal here. Why did they make this? How do they envision the consumer drinking it? Because there's so much variability there too, in terms for shochu and awamori. You're making a drink and think, well, how do I envision people enjoying this? Is it going to be on the rocks? Is it going to be cut with water, cool water, hot water? Oftentimes, and this is very important. Most of the time, shochu and awamori makers do not envision these drinks being consumed neat, right? And that's what, when you judge a competition, you're sipping all of these things straight. That wasn't the intended end use, almost invariably. Now, I know you could say the same thing for many spirits, but then again, many barrel-aged spirits are supposed to be neat, or maybe with just a little pinch of some dilution. So that's how they're envisioning it. Very different from the shochu world. And maybe shochu makers need to keep that in mind when they submit in the future. Maybe they do need to select their brands that do play better just out under the open air by themselves, and will make sense to an international spirits judge who, at this point in the game, is invariably going to be better versed in the world's more famous spirits traditions, the more far-reaching spirits traditions, whether it's brandy, cognac, rum, whiskey, gin. Now some of the South American spirits as well have entered the fray. Pisco and cachaça is, these are big ones. Shochu's not there yet. It's going to take several years. But, there's a lot of interest, and I think we should get it right early on because it's only going to help judges get up to speed on these things. If we keep on just saying all rice shochu in this category, in these flights, holy crap, you're going to confuse people. And then you do the same with sweet potato, it's 10 times, 100 times worse in terms of the resulting confusion. So my hat's off to the Tokyo Whiskey and Spirits competition for really breaking it and segmenting it. I think they're best in class in the world up to this point.
I think they're doing a nice job for sure.
Yeah.
Getting back to
just need more of that.
Getting back to your comment about how you've got spirits judges from Western spirits traditions judging these drinks and not really being able to, or just lacking context. I think that's so true. When you do go into these websites and you look at the medal winners, a lot of it's barrel aged. It's the barrel aged shochus that are getting the awards in the shochu category, and I think it's because it's expressing the vanilla, it's expressing the oak, it's showing what they expect from a nice barrel aged spirit. But that wasn't the point, right?
No, right.
It's tasting that main ingredient itself and how that expresses in the aromas and flavors and the balance and all that. So yeah, there's work to do, but it'll be a fun challenge.
Here's a comment from YouTube. Mark Carlson says, if you look at these are beer categories as they're explained and defined for the beer tasting competition. So hazy IPA is a good call out. It's still not an official category. So it is important to figure out the types that are popular and the types that are being ordered, and how do you define those? What's inbounds and what's out of bounds? These types of conversations are going to be very interesting in the shochu and awamori world, as they are absolutely for every other delicious drink in the world. It's just that the beer world, the craft beer world, has been doing this for a lot longer, and I think they have a better read on what these styles should be. Michael Jackson, bless his heart, may he rest in peace, got that train rolling, and to this day it just keeps on. There's so much innovation in the beer world, and they keep on stretching the boundaries of these styles, creating new subcategories or cousin styles. Very, very cool stuff. I think we're starting to see the same thing in shochu, especially in the sweet potato world, as we see new varietals of sweet potato, very tricky sweet potato types that people are hesitant to use. People are figuring it out. They're finding the best practices. They're using new yeast strains, as you said. They're sometimes lowering the temperature on the fermentation to stretch it out and to get more aroma out of it. A lot of experimentation going on and some really interesting styles being born because of it. And I think this is going to be a lovely challenge for anyone who has to judge them moving forward. And I think I had several of those types. I'm pretty sure I had Dayame, as you said, the double gold winner in one of my flights. So it'll be interesting to see how I scored that.
Sure. So yeah, I was actually able to correctly guess 2 of the brands.
Oh yeah,
in my 5 flights. Yeah,
wow.
When I went back, I knew exactly what it was.
I figured it was. I can't say for sure. I'll have to check. And I think I have a general idea of which one of it might have been, but I wasn't willing to guess.
Yeah, and on my tasting sheets, I just wrote the distillery and the brand as my guess, and then when I got the results, I was right on. But the 2 that I actually guessed on, I figured them both out.
Jeez.
Now, can I throw you a little bit of a curveball because you mentioned beer?
Go for it.
With Mark's style category comment, hazy IPA. My understanding is if your beer is hazy, that's not a good thing, traditionally, and basically American craft brewers realized that they could just make it a new category to cover the fact that it's a fault. True or false?
I'm not wading into that. I'm not going to pick sides on that one.
Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
I mean, because
Yeah.
I'm not the biggest hazy IPA fan, but I also have had several from Vermont. I don't know why would I throw that word out there that I actually adored.
Sure.
So, uh, I'm a fan. Well, a measured fan, I guess. But it's not an official style yet. It will become one if makers take it to a certain level and it can't be ignored anymore. That's for sure. Why?
Mm.
What? Do you have an answer to your question? Have you picked a
I
side?
haven't. Oh, I have opinions.
Are
I
you gonna
I
share or
think
no?
this is sure. I got no skin in the beer game.
Okay.
My feeling is that IPAs are popular with craft beer breweries because they're relatively easy and relatively fast to make. So you've got product to market.
Mm-hmm.
That's and I think a lot of it is we tell consumers what they like,
Yep.
not
You're not
necessarily
wrong.
that consumers know what they want. And I think that's how IPAs started to take off. And then I think that's how these sub classifications of IPAs, as they've moved into more and more experimental styles, and they're like, well, oh man, now our beer is clouded. What do we do? Ah, it's a hazy IPA, right? Or
Sure.
it's got a lot of fruit character. Ah, it's a bubblegum IPA, right? All of these made up sounding names start
Don't give
appearing on
people any
cans,
ideas.
and yeah. So as you know, I'm a stout and porter guy. So
Yep.
kind of the other end of the spectrum. I like my beers malty and dark, but um, these hopheads, these IPAs, it's just like it's so much of it just feels like marketing to me,
Uh huh.
and I'm just wondering what the reckoning will be long term on IPA.
Yeah. I'm gonna err toward. I have a strong preference for a more traditional IPA. I guess. Well, not that
Mhm.
traditional. I do like my hops. But and then I enjoy APAs, which tend to have more citrusy hop character. But anyways, let's not go down a beer
Yeah,
rabbit hole right now because we do have one
sure.
more short segment to get into before the end of the hour. And that, anyways, I think we can wrap up the whole judging thing, the spirits judging thing. These spirits competitions are not in their current form the correct shape to really do shochu and awamori justice, and
Yeah.
you'll be hearing more about those things
So I
from.
just wanted to ping this up. Maya was also a
Oh, okay.
competition a judge in this, and
Yeah.
she now sounds like the English teacher nobody wanted to take her class back in college.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Stingy
she didn't
scores.
want to give out any medals apparently. So
Oh no, they'll 90 will still earn medals, and
yeah,
depending on the competition, 80s can earn medals. As you said, there are some. I don't know how all these competitions work, but I've judged at competitions that are very stingy with medals,
mhm,
and others that are just participation prizes all over the shop. So we'll see.
yeah, sure.
But
And we
anyways,
got a
there's a lot of stuff to.
question from Bill Gunter here. Did the emo styles, so the sweet potato styles being judged, get broken down by type of sweet potato? They did
They
not.
did not.
No, they were
No.
based on the aging method, and then what happens is the flight is ordered by ABV, so you're trying the lower proof, the 25%, 30% first, and you're moving up to Genshu toward the end of the flight. Ideally, the flights would be broken out by ABV as well, but I think
Yeah.
they maybe just didn't have enough submissions, and they thought that the aging method was more important than the ABV.
Uh huh.
So
Right.
anyway, what's our last segment? I forgot what we were going to talk about.
The last segment for today is booze news, and we
Oh
have an
man.
art, or I don't know. I was thinking, Whiskey Richard on No Communication had an interesting article just the other day that I thought was worth highlighting. You read this, right?
I did. Yeah.
And it's about grain whiskey production in Japan. It's on No Communication, which is the website that he writes for and hosts and edits. And I'm gonna put what's the best way to put this out there for people? I'm gonna put it in the chat, and I'm gonna send it out to both Facebook and YouTube, just so that people can see it. I think a lot of people have probably read it. And his thesis is that because it's so hard to come by grain whiskey for blending in Japan, if you're not Suntory or Nikka or one of these other gigantic houses, then there's a vacuum. There is no grain whiskey in the country. Most of these smaller makers aren't making it themselves. What to do if we still want to make something that we can call Japanese whiskey? Enter potentially the Korui Shochu makers. And Korui Shochu, for those in the know, is a multiply distilled, basically a pure shochu, and I put that in air quotes because it's not really a shochu. It's definitely not an authentic shochu. It shouldn't be called shochu. But anyways, the Korui Shochu makers do make a lot of this neutral spirit, and there's no reason why they couldn't take their gigantic industrial column stills and start making grain whiskey with them. And in addition to being very, very educational, this article, it's an interesting thesis. What was your reaction to that article, Stephen?
No, I agree. There's certainly a vacuum. You've got all of these startup whiskey distilleries making very small quantities of malt whiskey in the Japanese style, all throughout the country, and they're going to struggle to work up to scale to get to the point where they've got the volume that current demand is asking for, simply through malt whiskey production, because you get relatively little distillate. In the article, I think he mentions one distillery where their production every time they run their malt whiskey still is around 550 bottles. Right. And given how much whiskey people would like to drink, how much Japanese whiskey people would like to drink, that's a very, very low quantity. Now, a grain distillery can make hundreds of thousands of liters easily because of the process. And you can actually be, what I didn't realize before I read the article, is you can be feeding new fermented liquid into the still while the still's running.
Sure.
So it's not like you're going to take a batch, move it into the still and go. It can just constantly be flowing through. So you really never have to turn the still off. And so you can make enormous quantities of grain whiskey in these continuous column stills. And there are a lot of Korui Shochu makers with column stills dotted throughout the country who could be filling this gap, who could be making grain whiskey to allow to become essentially an independent grain whiskey distillery, so that these smaller malt whiskey makers can start to blend, because there's no trading here, right? Trading just sort of doesn't exist. There's been I think there's
play nice here.
Not in the whiskey world. I think there's been one example of Japanese whiskey makers sharing and creating a collaboration brand. Yeah, I think that was also on Namunication in the last week or two. I saw that article. Sorry, I don't have a link to it, but
okay. Well, yeah, Namunication is a good resource, folks. So if you're interested in learning more about Japanese drinks and professional, and there's a lot of whiskey content there in particular, then definitely check it out.
Yeah, definitely whiskey focused, and it's great. Yeah, it's a nice resource for sure. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting article about the grain whiskey shortage and how it might be resolved through domestic production from the shochu makers. The other article that was kind of funny, I guess, was Whiskey Richard seems to come down on the side that these new Japanese whiskey labeling standards are going to make zero difference whatsoever.
I read that one too. Yeah, very interesting take.
Yeah, much shorter article actually. That's a 2-minute read. This one's about a 7-minute read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
but anyway,
if you read slow like me, then it was 10. But it's the other article where he talks about the loopholes of the new regulations. There's a couple of screamers in there.
Yeah.
And there's been some more clarification about who made these labeling guidelines. It was a really small club of people. And it was even other people in the association were kept in the dark completely about what types of negotiations and discussions were going on, what was going to be the end result. So it was a surprise for them as much of a surprise for them as it was for us. And then he also says some of the loopholes in terms of what you can and cannot do. what are you obliged to do under the new guidelines? And one of them in particular, you got to read the article.
Yep.
Is just it'll make you guffaw. It's like, really, that qualifies as you doing your bit to make sure you don't confuse people about Japanese whiskey. It's absolutely, what's the term? Gobsmacking.
Yeah.
Can you use the word in that way? I'm not really good at using that word.
There, I just posted that.
That's the other one.
That article, the other one. Yeah, another.
Okay,
another
cool. And that
article.
went out to both as well. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're running up against the end of the hour. This has been a long and very detailed discussion on a bunch of things, and I think I like segmenting it out a little bit, keeping it organized, especially on days when we don't have serious or copious amounts of alcohol to go through and talk about. I think this is a good framework. If anybody else out there has another segment that they think we should add, then let us know. We're happy to be flexible with this, and we will be moving forward as we
I think
move
definitely
closely, or
maybe
move strongly towards episode 50.
Possibly fewer segments. Keep the show shorter.
Yeah, I think short shows are good. I'm sure people out there agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what's happened with this StreamYard setup is we end up talking longer than we do on Instagram.
Yeah. Yep.
So
that's true.
Those shows are getting longer, but we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to try and keep them under 40 minutes like we always used to. Anyways, for those of you out there who are still with us, thank you very much. And for those of you who are joining late or watching this on archive, thank you for checking us out. We've got a lot of other content on Instagram that if you go to my Instagram account, then you can watch a bunch of the old episodes where we plow through all sorts of different stuff. And we'll be back again in your feed next week. Next week, we will be talking about a brand new malt whiskey distillery. And that should be very interesting. Anybody out there who's interested in Japanese whiskey, malt whiskey coming out of Japan should definitely tune in for that. We should have some interesting little nuggets of information for you. But until that time, I hope you guys are happy and healthy and safe and enjoying a nice drink. If you're not, start thinking about your next drink right now. From Stephen and I here in Japan to all of you out there all around the world, a very hearty and heartfelt kanpai.
Kanpai.
Kanpai.